Happy holidays, guys, and welcome back to the Vanishing Hour. Sorry for the massive delay between this episode and the last one. Some of it was legit reasons, and some of it was just me being a lazy piece of shit. But regardless, I am here now. I am excited. I have a great case for us to discuss. One that I feel could be solved any day now, and I hope it is. So let's just get started right away. A little background into how I came across this case. So I do my best to pick cases that I personally feel haven't been covered enough or have enough going on in them to have me questioning aspects of it. That's not to say that not every case deserves to be covered. They all do. But finding the ones that I feel haven't received the coverage they deserve is my first goal, and it is actually harder than it seems. One really great resource has been the TV show, ironically, called Still a Mystery. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend that you do. I know this sounds like an ad, but I assure you I am not relevant enough to be pumping ads for anyone. This is a genuine recommendation. I watch it through my Discovery Plus subscription, but I have seen it on Hulu Live as well. Anyway, it's only 3 seasons deep, but man, is it good. The Alicia Hummel case we covered a while back was also covered on there, and there's a couple more that I have planned for upcoming episodes. But again, I highly recommend checking it out. Today's case was recently covered on this same show, Season 3, Episode 10, titled Somebody Knows Something, and I can assure you that is a fitting title for this case. This case struck a chord with me for several reasons, but the one that mattered most to me was the fact that you could feel the loss when reading her story. Having never met or seen her in my life, I felt her loss of her friends and family being carried around with them. You could feel it with every article and news clip and photo that you came across. She was just this soulful person, the type that leaves a huge ache in everyone they touch after they leave this earth. She was a mom to 2 of her own kids, as well as a foster mom to 3 more. Loving fostering is one of the most selfless things you can do, in my opinion. Those people are godsends. I'm barely keeping it together, dealing with my own flesh and blood, and I wish I had more willpower and strength and money to take on so many other children. So that's what stung me most at first. The world needs more of these types of people and not less of them. Anyways, let's get started here. This is The Vanishing of Najah Ferrell. Najah was born October 14th, 1988, and was the oldest of 4 sisters. Her family described her as the glue that held everyone together. She was constantly in contact with everyone, making sure everyone knew what was going on and staying connected. She remembered every birthday, anniversary, graduation, all of those, and she was 100% there for you when you needed her. She was nurturing by nature, always surrounded by children and loving on her nieces and nephews, and that didn't change when she had 2 sons of her own, Thomas and Caden. Beautiful little boys. Her family said that she was a damn good mother, very hands-on, always involved and participating in fun activities with them, taking them on adventures and goofing off and just being silly with them. Her boys adored her and she adored them. Najah enjoyed being a mom so much, she made the decision to extend that love to 3 foster children as well, who she loved and treated as her own. She was also a very no-nonsense type of person too, though. She wasn't naive or easily taken advantage of. She had a good sense of the world around her. She was extremely independent and sure of herself, and she evoked confidence in everything she did. When Najah had free time, she liked to toy with the idea of using it to potentially travel. Now, from my understanding, Najah grew up in Indianapolis, I can't talk, Indiana, where she resided with her kids and longtime boyfriend of 10 years until sometime around 2015, when she made the decision to move her family about 13 miles west to a smaller suburb of Avon, Indiana. It's a straight shot across the Highway 36 there. She was still well within driving distance of her hometown, her sisters, and her mother, Paula, who she was very close with, and who still resided in or around the Indianapolis area. Oh, I nailed that one. That was perfect. Around this time, longtime boyfriend of Najah's decides to pop the question, and they become engaged. So outside looking in, it looks like everything is going great for the couple. But things apparently didn't last. I got differing accounts, but one source said that by December of 2018, Najah had decided to call it quits on the relationship. Other sources said that the breakup was closer to March 2019. Either way, it's really only a difference of 3 or 4 months, so not a big window of time. But I think the timing of this breakup, whether it be December or March, is crucial in this case, and I'll explain why as we go on. But either way, the reasoning was kind of vague, but from what I gathered, Najah called it off because she just wasn't vibing with it anymore. The relationship wasn't heading where she wanted it to go, and it kind of sounded like Najah felt she would be better off. Like I said, all vague. The only thing that was said about it was she didn't care for where things were going. Their whole relationship is very hush-hush in regards to this case. I never caught a name or if he was the father of her children or anything like that. Honestly, I was surprised by this because he's nowhere on this case, period. Press interviews, public pleas, social media, the dude's a fucking ghost. I don't know if this is by choice or he tries and just isn't there. I'm not sure. Najah's children are being raised by her mother now, so again, I'm kind of wondering where he's at. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So by March 2019, it is clear that Najah is changing her life. She is dumping the fiancé, although she's still allowing him to live at her place, reasons unknown. I'm sure she was just being a kind person, letting him find his bearings. He probably has some investment in the kids as well. Or, maybe they were amicable enough to continue to live under the same roof. I don't know. But at this time, Najah had also decided to re-enter the workforce after a short break. She found a job at a Panera Bread in Indianapolis and was super excited about the early hours and making it work for her busy schedule. She accepted the job with the schedule of 5 a.m. to 2 p.m.-ish, which would allow her time to get off work and shoot over to the school to pick up the 3 foster children. Her 2 other kids were comfortable taking the bus home during this time. So, the night before March 15th, 2019, Najah talked on the phone with her mom, Paula, like she usually did. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. Najah wraps up the phone call, letting her mom know she needs to get the kids ready for bed. This is the last time Paula speaks to her daughter. The next day, Friday, March 15th, 2019, seemingly goes off without a hitch. All 5 children head out to school. Najah seemingly heads to work for her 3rd day of orientation at Panera. It isn't until later that evening that it's realized that something isn't right. Paula is notified sometime around 3 p.m. that the foster children were never picked up from school at 3 p.m. She's immediately concerned because that is not like Najah at all. If for some reason Najah wouldn't have been able to make it there, she would have 100% found someone to get there for her. She would be communicating constantly. So, Paula is worried, but she decides to call Najah and hopefully get some answers. Only Najah's phone isn't picking up. Getting a little more concerned, she starts reaching out to family and friends and asking them if they've heard from Najah. She confirms that the biological kids made it home from school that day, but nobody has seen or heard from Najah since early that morning. So family decides to reach out to her job. Come to find out that Najah never made it to her 5 a.m. shift that day and was considered a no-call, no-show. Her family is now in red alert mode. They're calling everyone, searching everywhere that she could possibly be, using Find My iPhone, literally anything they can think of. But they're coming up empty. By 10 p.m. that night, her family makes the decision to call 911 and report her missing. This is where things get a little tricky, and it honestly sucks that our system works this way. I understand why, but it's also an acknowledged issue by our criminal justice system, and it needs resolving. So, remember how I said Najah's family still lives in Indianapolis? Well, that means that when they call into 911 or police or wherever, the police for that jurisdiction receive the case. That is how local and state law enforcement work. If you get a crime in California, you're not having Nevada police working it. Same concept applies on a city level as well. Now, they can work in tandem together if, let's say, the crime committed occurs in both places. but usually the place that the crime occurred is the jurisdiction that handles the investigation. Now, the problem that needs resolving is the communication between jurisdictions. Law enforcement in general acknowledges that there is a struggle to communicate between said jurisdictions. By nature, it's important to limit information on investigations in order to maintain integrity. But at some point, you limit information to the point of hindrance, and that's when it becomes to be more hurtful than helpful. In this case, Najah lived in Avon, Indiana, 13 miles west of Indianapolis. Her last known location is Avon. Therefore, Avon would take the case. Hindsight, the call should have been made to Avon police, but that's not her family's fault. They did the right thing. They contacted authorities. The IMPD, aka the Indianapolis Metro Police Department, took the call. They sent an officer to the family's residence who took the report. The report then went to the desk of an investigator for missing persons at IMPD. At this time, it was unclear to the police officer taking the report that there was a jurisdictional factor involved here. So because of this, the case remained in IMPD jurisdiction when it should have went to Avon. Again, a lot of little avoidable issues here if communication was better on all fronts. We all know that missing persons cases have the highest chance of being solved within the first 48 hours. Tragically, Najah's first 48 hours were spent in the wrong jurisdiction and being deprived of the attention it deserved. By Monday, March 18th, 2019, the IMPD investigator thoroughly looks over the case and realizes Avon PD needs to be contacted. He contacts the Deputy Chief of Investigations for Avon PD, Brian Nugent, who's been pretty much the face of this investigation law enforcement-wise since it began. Nugent receives the case and assesses that obviously he's behind in locating her, given it's been 3 days now since she went missing. He immediately must begin playing catch-up, so he meets with the family and has them go over all of the information again just to make sure nothing was missed in the initial report. He establishes electronic surveillance, which means he puts eyes on her call records and bank records for any ongoing activity after the date of her disappearance. He also puts in a request for the last 90 days of each to establish routine and to sniff out any deviations in that routine, should there be any. It's a very smart move, in my opinion. When Nugent receives these records, he sees that not only has there been no activity on the bank or phone since the disappearance, but that for the last 90 days, there hasn't been any huge influx of ingoing or outgoing calls that would be suspicious, nor were there any huge money withdrawals or strange activity. All is normal by all accounts. So the next thing he does is investigate her personal life. Was there anything going on in work or home life that would point in any one direction? That is when Nugent finds out about the long-term relationship slash engagement that was recently ended. He decides to talk to the ex-fiancé and get his accounts. He establishes that the ex was the last person to see Najah the morning she disappeared. After all, he is still living at her home. Nugent says that the ex states that Najah woke up and got ready and left for work at about 3:30 a.m., and that she left the home fine. He hasn't seen or heard from her since, though. After further questioning, he lets the guy go and begins to check out his alibi and account of Najah that morning. Sure enough, on March 21st, Nugent receives the video surveillance from Najah's apartment complex that seemingly catches Najah's vehicle departing the residence at the time the ex stated, driving at a normal speed and nothing amiss. She isn't followed out of the complex by another vehicle or anything weird like that. So this, along with, I'm assuming, other unknown information, seemingly clears the ex from the investigation. Now, when listening to the interviews of Najah's family, they seem to not see it so cut and dry. For one of her sisters stated that Najah's usual work shoes and coat were left behind that morning. Now, she was just attending orientation, so maybe she didn't need them, is my first thought. But if it's weird to her family, it should be noted at the very least. Now, the family also stated that the night Najah went missing, the ex-fiancé was one of the first people they called. They said that he told them he only that he was equally worried and that he was going to head over to the family house to help in locating Najah. Only the dude never showed up and then stopped answering their calls altogether. Now, if this is true, what the fuck you doing, dude? Anyway, those were the two issues brought up by the family. Another issue that I initially was like, why? And Nugent also ends up addressing is the time frame for when she left. Najah was expected at work at 5 a.m. She lived no further than 15 minutes away from her job, and yet she departs her residence at 3:15 a.m., a whole hour and 45 minutes before she needed to be at work. There could obviously be a couple reasons for this. Maybe she had, a few stops to make prior to work that would require time, such as, gas, errands, grabbing a coffee, etc. And she was giving herself some time for that. Or maybe, like the show briefly suggests, she wasn't planning on going to work that day. She did leave her work coat and shoes at home, so it is a possibility. Like I mentioned, police obtained the video footage, and after watching a clip of it for myself, I wouldn't be confident in saying with certainty that it confirms Najah was even the person driving. Maybe there was multiple cameras of varying quality and at varying angles that could further confirm it was her, but basing it off of the one clip that they shared in the TV episode, there is no way in hell you could confirm it was even a person driving the car. Hell, it could have been a bear for all I could tell. The footage was grainy, it was black and white, as well as being shot at night and from a poor angle and far distance. So my mind started thinking maybe this wasn't Najah leaving on her own accord. It's a thought that I can't seem to shake either, but without further information, obviously, police seemed pretty sure it was her, so that leads me to believe they had more info confirming it was her. Now, I want to throw out there the podcast 1041 with Todd McComas. It's rare that I ever listen to any other true crime podcasts since starting my own because I don't like to pull material from others. I have maybe one or two that I've listened to religiously and I love them, but I do my best to knowingly stay away from others' content. But a third of the info I could find on this case was brief news clips that were just regurgitated vague info. Another third was the TV show episode I mentioned earlier, and the last third was from this podcast. There's an episode titled Justice for Najah where Nugent is actually present, recounting his work on this investigation 1 year in. It's very interesting information and helpful when you get it from the horse's mouth. So I do recommend checking out the episode if you'd like to hear more in-depth recounts of the investigators' actions 1 year after Najah's disappearance. But anyway, on this episode, Nugent explained that interviewing the children was his next step. They use a specific agency trained in handling sensitive situations and children to help with the questioning process so as to not further traumatize them, which is very nice to hear. You don't always realize the impact that experience can have on younger people. He didn't elaborate at all into the line of questions that were geared towards the children, but he did seem to hint at the fact that whatever info the children provided for why Najah left so early that morning did check out to some degree and made sense. So essentially, that there was a somewhat validated reason for her to be leaving at that time. Again, my assumption is errands and coffee, run/gas, or something of that nature. Again, my assumption. Further information that was obtained was withheld for case integrity, of course. 6 days later, on March 22nd, 2019, Najah's case received its first big break. A phone call came into Avon PD regarding some items that were found by construction workers working overnights on the road in the area of Interstate 65, just northwest of Indianapolis. The items found included her driver's license/ID, an ATM card, and papers one would find in, say, a purse or a car. Initially, the items were found by a construction worker just laying off to the side of the road. He handed the items to a state trooper on the scene who was directing traffic, who then ran the information from the ID card and realized it was linked to a missing persons case out of Avon, Indiana. He immediately called Avon PD, and an investigator headed out to the scene to collect the evidence. Investigators noted that the area in which the items were located had zero correlation to any route Najah would have been expected to take that morning. It was in the opposite I can't talk. It was in the opposite direction of home and work and family residence. It was in an area that you pass as you're leaving the state, heading north on Interstate 65. Given the fact that they were literally just laying off to the side of the road, it felt more like the items may have been dumped or thrown from a vehicle. Weirdly enough, though, nothing else was found. No purse, clothing, car, or any other items were located in the area. On March 26, 2019, the next big break in the case came in. A police officer in the area of 86th and Michigan Road spotted a vehicle sitting in a vacant parking lot and decided to run the plates. They came back as being Najah Ferrell's, a known missing person. Investigators arrived at the scene and began processing the car. The vehicle was not warm, meaning it hadn't been driven recently. There was no damage to the vehicle, indicating that it had been in an accident or maybe had been stolen, like broken windows, locks, compromised wiring, anything like that. Najah, by nature, was a very clean and organized person, and her car reflected that. So nothing was amiss or in disarray in the vehicle. It looked like it had just been driven to the area and somebody just walked away. Regardless, the car was processed for any DNA evidence that may have been extracted. Given the area it was located in, Nugent also felt that gathering up any potential surveillance footage could be useful. There were several fast food restaurants and other businesses nearby that all could have potentially caught something. What Nugent noted was that, like the ID and ATM card find, this location had little to no correlation to where Najah would have been if following her normal routine that morning. So just for a little perspective, I Google mapped these areas to get an idea of what he meant by that. So from Avon, where Najah departed from that morning, to where her ID was found, was about 15 miles northeast. From where her ID was found to where her car was found was another 6 to 7 miles north. So at least up until this point, everything was remaining fairly local, yet somehow out of the way of Najah's routine. So the surveillance footage comes in, and they find something rather interesting. The parking lot was a pretty big lot to start with, but on the north end near one of the fast food restaurants, footage captured Najah's vehicle being driven into the lot and parked where it was ultimately found. The driver, seemingly male, gets out and walks out of frame and into the frame of another camera where he is picked up by a silver or similar colored four-door sedan. Now, the footage is time-stamped 1.5 hours after Najah was seen on camera leaving her complex the day she went missing. She left at 3:30 a.m. and her car is caught on camera being dumped at 5:05 a.m., 5 minutes after her shift would have been starting at Panera. Like the other footage captured, it's too dark, it's grainy, and too far for any real identification. The camera that captured the sedan picking up the suspect, while closer in distance, was still grainy and black and white. The angle makes it impossible to see a license plate number as well. But it does give a basic description of a vehicle, which I think is key. Nugent explains that while they are still extremely tight-lipped about this footage, it did/will help confirm parts of specific persons' stories. He also comments that the footage confirms there is more than just the one person who now knows what happened. Having a driver pick up the suspect makes it more than one person by fact. They are just waiting for a name. That's all they would need from anyone with information. He also said that the video was of quote-unquote confirming value, but he didn't give much more detail into that. Now, despite both of these findings, though, no new breaks come into the case until April 8th, 2019, when the case takes a hard left into a direction nobody wanted. The morning of April 8th, a story breaks from Crown Point, Indiana, roughly 100 miles north of Indianapolis. Two fishermen out by a retention pond, literally feet from Interstate 65 at 109th Avenue, are throwing out lines when one of them snags. They reel it in, and to both of the men's disbelief and horror, a severed human foot is on the end of the line. They immediately dialed 911, and Crown Point PD arrives on scene. Not long after this discovery, Nugent receives a notification on his newsfeed of his phone of the finding. He doesn't think much more of it, though, and continues on with his day. By that evening, though, the wind shifts for him. He receives a call from Crown Point letting him know they think this foot may be tied to their missing persons case for Najah. Nugent, wondering why and how they came to this conclusion, heads to the scene immediately. So initially, when Crown Point police and investigators got the call about the foot, they got there and examined it, and that's when they noticed a tattoo on the foot that appeared to initially read Naga, Nagah. Not sure what it meant, they decided to, of all things, Google it to see if it meant something in particular. Google asked them, "Did you mean Najah?" and had several links to missing persons case Najah Ferrell, a mere 100 miles south of them. They make the connection and they call Avon PD. Avon PD had all identifiable information on Najah on record, from photos to SSN numbers to identifying scars, marks, and tattoos. They got a look at the tattoo and identified it as Najah's, but to cover all their bases, they were still responsible for sending it out for DNA confirmation. They also snapped a photo of the tattoo and had it shown to Paula, who also confirmed it was Najah's. Obviously, when the results came back, it confirmed what everyone on the case now knew. So many who heard this and may hear it now think, okay, it's just one foot. While not good, someone can survive without a foot, right? This doesn't confirm for sure that she's dead. Well, upon medical examiner review, they were able to note that the removal of her foot occurred post-mortem, meaning she was not alive when the foot was removed. Without going into too much detail, because I'm obviously not an expert, I'd imagine this is usually done by a number of things, including bruising pattern, blood coagulation, tissue damage, and other hemorrhage indicators, because all of these things present differently when you're alive versus when you're dead. So, with the discovery of the foot in the pond, investigators immediately began to drag the pond for more evidence, obviously. They also brought in cadaver dogs as well, and strangely enough, nothing else has been found. A single foot in the middle of a retention pond over 100 miles away from where the victim was last seen, to some, read more of like a red herring than anything. I would guess that this person scattered evidence in many different areas. They already did with the ID and the bank cards and the car dumping, so I don't really see this as being any different. Now, while the medical examiner was able to confirm that Najah was deceased before the removal of her foot, they weren't able to conclude what the cause or manner of death was. Now, there's a big difference between the two. A lot of times people do get them confused. There are only 4 options when it comes to manner of death. That's homicide, suicide, accidental, and when it's neither of those 3, it is listed as undetermined. That is manner of death. Cause of death is how the manner of death occurred. So if someone, for example, was shot and killed in a robbery, the manner of death is homicide, obviously. And the cause of death is a gunshot wound to the head or wherever they were shot that ultimately led to them dying. Being that the ME only had a foot to work with, they were not able to determine if her death was a homicide, suicide, or accidental, so it was listed as undetermined. Yes, the chances of this being anything other than a homicide seem slim to us, but slim isn't enough to legally call it a homicide. They have to go by the book. Najah's cause of death is unknown as well. They cannot determine what killed her just from her foot, unfortunately. And sadly, this is where the case has remained for the past almost 3 years now. At least publicly, no new information has been released, nor has there been any recent updates. After going over everything that I could find, it has left me with a few questions and thoughts that I do want to talk about. So first off, the podcast I referred to earlier aired in July of 2020. The Still a Mystery episode aired earlier this year in June of 2021. So almost a full year apart. My question is, Nugent in the podcast episode claims that they have verified the reason Najah left at 3:30 a.m. that mysterious morning via interview with her children and possibly the ex-fiance. Yet over a year later on the TV show, the family sounds like they have no idea why she left that early that morning. They seemed confused as to why her work shoes and coat were left behind, among other things. It may be nothing, but it was something I noticed when I compared the notes I had from both sources. One of Najah's sisters makes a statement that she believes whoever did this knew Najah's schedule, both work and home. That would indicate that the person who did this also knew she would be leaving the house earlier than anticipated for work that morning, unless this was a random attack, which I don't think anyone honestly thinks it was. I'm not sure what I think. I'm still wondering if she even left the house alone to begin with, if it was even her on the surveillance footage. The next question that arose for me was when I saw the surveillance footage of her car being abandoned. One of the sources mentions that the driver was picked up by another vehicle minutes later. Either the suspect called ahead of time and asked to be picked up from this location, and the person who did arrive has no idea of what they were getting themselves into, or the person picking him up was in on it and either knew to be there because they followed him or were expecting a call and were ready. Either way, that person is probably their best shot at getting information about this case. I do remember with the Emily Main case, obviously it was another country, different circumstances and whatnot, but I remember with that case, authorities stated that they ran checks on the cell phone towers in the area during the time she went missing and compared it to the suspect list that they had forming. I was curious as to if this was something the police can or did do to see if anyone's number popped up around the time that her car was dumped in that parking lot. It would obviously be a long shot, but it was a thought nonetheless. 5 a.m. isn't a hugely busy time of day, so I don't know. It was just throwing an idea out there. Now, the third thing that I noted, still on the car, was there were no trauma signs to the car or indicators of trauma inside the car. I had assumed they didn't find any blood either, although they may be withholding that info as well. But working off the assumption that they didn't find any blood in the car. If you think about it, Najah is assumed alive and well leaving her home in her car at around 3:30 a.m. An hour and a half later, her car is being dumped in a parking lot by an unknown person with zero blood in it. We know she was dismembered, and at least part of her was found over 120 miles away. The drive, according to Google Maps, on that day, Friday, March 15, 2019, at roughly 3:34 in the morning, would have taken anywhere between 2 hours and 2 hours and 20 minutes. Knowing that, there's no way in hell that the suspect would have had time to murder Najah, dismember her, and drive the 2 hours north and then the 2 hours back in order to be on camera dumping her car in that Studio Movie Grill parking lot. Knowing that, it makes sense that there was no blood in the car. She probably wasn't transported in the car either then, unless this person was trained in CSI handling. So that kind of hints at the idea that she was later placed in the retention pond. How much later, I wouldn't really know. There was no autopsy report or estimation of how long she had been in there. It does make you question if she was killed immediately or maybe held for some time, though, if you think about it. Usually, let's see, she went missing March 15th and her foot was found April 8th, so that's almost a full month. If her foot had been in there, say, for the full month, I would find it kind of hard to believe that you would be able to identify a tattoo on that skin. I'm not an expert, but that is something that kind of stood out to me. But lastly, the thing that I wanted to make note of was the fact of dismemberment itself. I don't feel it's a very common method to be used in homicides in general. You usually hear about shootings, stabbings, blunt force traumas with victims still, for lack of a better term, intact. The dismemberments are usually from the hyper-personal crimes, in my opinion. On a rare occasion, you get a serial killer dismembering people. But given that there aren't dozens of other feet sprouting up in bodies of water in the area, I'd say that serial killer is pretty much off the table. For me, at least. This reads much more personal. This is someone who wanted Najah to not be found and to just completely disappear. Many speculated that the foot was a red herring to lead investigators in a different direction. I don't think I agree with that one as much. I think it was a spreading of Najah's remains as far out as time allowed without causing too much of a suspicion in hopes of never being found. Some ID cards here, a foot here, all along Interstate 65 leading north, ironically, which eventually dead ends just shy of Lake Michigan, a vast body of water likely to hold many, many secrets. Dragging Lake Michigan is a mission and a half, and I wouldn't be surprised if Najah's trail leads there. So, this brings me to my theories. What do I think happened? Well, I know for certain that Najah didn't leave on purpose. No loving mother leaves babies behind with no rhyme or reason. Also, I know Najah didn't remove her foot and put it in the pond herself. We know this for a fact. So that confirms foul play 100%. Now, the level of involvement is debatable. Was it an accident and the person panicked and turned what was an accident into a full-blown cover-up? Maybe. You can't rule that out. But I'd lean more towards this being intentional, whoever did this to her. Next, list of suspects. Who would want Najah gone if this isn't a random killing, which, by the way, I don't think it is. Well, the only person who is known to have a potential motive would be the ex-fiancé. And given his scarcity around this case, his lack of involvement, the family noting he never arrived to help look for Najah the night she disappeared, I'd say he's top of my list at least. Police alleged that they cleared him, but they didn't say how. Nugent hints at, quote, several irons in the fire. Is the ex-fiancé one of them? Is he only cleared for the time being because they don't have enough on him? That would be my guess. He was the last person to see her alive, and more often than not, the last person to see someone alive at least knows something. Something tells me this case is hinging on someone close to the ex-fiancé coming forward with even the smallest bit of information that will eventually blow this whole thing wide up. I hope whoever that person is hearing this right now and realizes it's time to come forward. Close this out for the family and for those kids. They don't deserve this, and honestly, nobody does. If anybody has any information they feel is pertinent to this case, please reach out to Crime Stoppers at 317-262-TIPS, TIPS. You can remain anonymous. Until next time, guys, stay safe. Bye-bye.